people who are in organized religion, I respect it. And I think as long as you're doing good things, and you're not using it as a sort of excuse for pushing your own agenda or trying to control people, I think that is, you're right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Catholics in Ordinary Time. This week's guest is Maggie Miller. Maggie is a student, and she is in a study abroad program in France at the moment. So this is kind of an international episode of Catholics in Ordinary Time. A very interesting perspective on someone who grew up in Brooklyn, and while she's baptized Catholic, is still trying to understand how she might practice as an adult or not. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. So good. So you're in France.
I am in France. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you enjoying Paris?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's perfect. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's great.
It's not perfect, but it is Paris. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm in Aix-en-Provence, actually.
Oh,
in the
right.
south. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
nice. That sounds even nicer, more quieter. Yeah.
Yeah. Quiet, sunny.
That's good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So just to set things up for folks, I mean, I kind of know you, which is nice. But you are in your junior year or senior year? Junior year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good. And you're doing a semester abroad, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for coming on and talking about Catholic practice or not. You know what I mean? Because I'm doing a range of interviews with folks young adults who practice as Catholics and those that don't. And I'm just curious of how is that all going and what happened and all the rest. So maybe we could just start with. So tell me about your family, and I think I remember clearly that you were baptized Catholic.
I was, yes.
And tell me how did that come about?
Yeah, so my mom was raised Catholic and my dad was raised Baptist. But I think it was really important to my mom and to my mom's family that I was baptized and that my sister was baptized. So I was at the same time as my cousin, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how would you describe, to the degree you can know, religious practice in your family as far as describing your grandparents and then your parents and then what you've experienced? How would you kind of describe that?
Yeah. So my mom's family was definitely pretty Catholic. My mom's mom especially, but not, it didn't necessarily come up in talking to her every day, but, going to church regularly, that sort of thing. And then her father, also Catholic, but he sort of embraced a lot of different spiritual beliefs and practices and sort of strayed away from the, organized church, but then went back to it near the end of his life, to my understanding. And then sort of a similar story on my dad's side, I think pretty traditional, practices in terms of going to church regularly. But my dad was always sort of anti-establishment and organized religion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I think that definitely influenced me growing up in terms of being baptized and being, brought up in the Catholic Church, but then also this side with my dad of not taking everything with a grain of salt, I guess I'll say. So I think that sort of led me to where I am today, which is that when I was younger, we went to church and I was baptized. I made my first communion, but after that sort of stopped going regularly.
Okay. So when you were little, you actually, you went as a family to church, and that was kind of part of what you did. And then all the way through First Communion, which is kind of when you're first or second grade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then was there a moment when you all decided that's it, we're doing other things, or did the schedules just kind of fill up and kind of shift away?
Yeah, I think it was sort of a combination of, life just gets busy and you stop doing things. But, I was a kid, so I'm not totally sure, but I can imagine that my dad's more complicated feelings towards the church probably influenced our stopping. But my mom has said that what was important for her was giving my sister and I the option and sort of introducing us to religion and saying, this is what it's about, this is what it looks like. And then allowing us, as we grew up, to decide for ourselves whether or not we wanted to continue in that practice or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so there was the going to church part on Sunday. Was there a kind of a outside of church practice that was going on that was either walked away from or continues, or how would you describe, if you described having a prayer life or a
Yeah,
spiritual life, what's that look like for you?
I don't really know that I ever had one. I think, when I've traveled with my family and we've gone into churches, we've always lit candles for deceased relatives and that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
when we're in the physical presence of a church, I think it sort of comes back, or at, family holiday gatherings, not even a prayer, but a sort of moment before we eat.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think personally that I've ever had a practice of praying or um, being in touch with being spiritual on my own time.
Okay, great. So it wasn't as though you were doing prayers with your parents as a little kid routinely, and then you decided that's it, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, it wasn't the case. Oh,
Mhm.
what is your kind of operating system day in and day out as far as you and God, or not, or have you gone through moments where you came to Jesus or walked away or was something,
Yeah,
or no? How do you describe that?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, I don't think I've ever thought about God as like a specific person or entity that with whom I can have a relationship. I think I more sort of am drawn to the philosophy of the quote unquote world or universe, like doing things or giving you
Cosmos.
things.
Oh, so
Yeah.
so when someone says, "I just put it out there," or the universe came to my aid, or that makes some sort of sense to you.
Yeah. But not necessarily as something that's above, that's superhuman. I think more just in that we're all people in the world doing things, and what we're doing impacts other people, and that sort of energy creates a web that you can, I guess, not necessarily lean on or rely on to be given things, but
Hmm.
I don't know, that energy of everybody doing their own thing all the time sort of results in something tangible. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it
yeah.
doesn't. It is unclear because it's probably unclear, right?
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. How did you, when you think about people in organized religion, or
Mhm.
people whatever that is, what is your take on them?
I think, um, yeah, I mean, honestly, people who are in organized religion, I respect it. And I think as long as you're doing good things, and you're
Hmm.
not using it as a sort of excuse for pushing your own agenda or trying to control people, I think
Hmm.
that is, you're right. But it's hard for me to um, connect with
Hmm.
that unquestioning, or not unquestioning, but unconditional belief in something
Hmm. Hmm.
is difficult for me to recognize within myself or relate to.
Yeah. Or is it because you just think, well, what's the use of that? Do you have an interior that is kind of utilitarian in the kind of very very general sense of, like, you do that stuff that works and the stuff that you think, well, where's the benefit of that?
I think so.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think, or I guess I see the benefit, but I have been able to live. Yeah, so I guess that's correct, because I see the benefit of it for some people, but I guess the fact that I feel like I can live and find meaning in life and find morality without organized religion makes me feel like maybe it's not. necessary.
Yeah.
But I also at the same time do recognize why it has historically been necessary and why it could still be for someone.
Yeah. Right. So there's organized religion, and then there's a relationship with the divine, and they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
two different things. And there's a lot of people that would, go along with the yes, relationship with the divine, but no to organized religion. And it sounded like you're saying that you don't have in your experience or in your desires really. You're not reaching out for. I need this connection with the divine. You up to this point, you've been not that need hasn't presented itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it sort of goes back to what I was trying to express before that I don't know. I think my belief that we're all kind of part of something together replaces my need for the divine. Just in terms of needing to see a bigger meaning to the world. I think I've fulfilled that. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily look like a relationship with the divine for me.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you, if you were to have kids, how would you
Mhm.
begin to answer questions that kids certainly have? And in your case, you had them not that long ago, but
Mhm.
what would be your approach?
Like what happens when you die, like that sort of question.
That's good. We could start there because that's often a very crystallizing question because it kind of
Hmm.
resonates kind of forward and backwards
Yeah,
because that's why it seems such an important question in a way because the question has its own answer, but it opens up a lot of other questions.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think um, I was really grateful to have background in religion growing up, if not because I believed in every part of it myself, just to know that there are different ways to answer the same questions. Like certain people believe certain things. So I think I might introduce my kid to the different ways of thinking that, people have in the world and see if any of them resonate. And, of course, if it's like a really small child, maybe that wouldn't go over so well.
This week it's
But
Islam.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Let me introduce you to the
Um,
burqa just to see if it works for you. Well, I don't know.
yeah. But assuming that they could appreciate it, I think it's nice to know that everybody has the same questions and answers them differently, and you're not alone in wondering what happens.
And that people have questions.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because one can often think in a variety of the scenarios that you're the only one with a question. You're like, no, it's not true.
Right.
What do you say to a kid when they say, "What happens when we die?" What do you think?
I think I sort of have an internal battle between the very sort of pragmatic side of my brain, which says, nothing, you decompose and that's that's it.
Hmm.
And the, I guess, other side, which is that's really hard to grapple with and maybe not even useful to think because it's very depressing and not comforting when you do lose someone. So yeah, I don't know how I would answer a kid, but that's still kind of a question that I have for myself, I guess. Like, I'm not sure if I believe in um, a concrete heaven, but I definitely don't want to just think about the soul kind of disappearing. So, yeah, I guess that's a question I kind of still have.
Where do you think? Because you've lost your grandfather, and where do you think what happened, or do you need to answer
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question, too. I think something that one of his friends said to me and all of my cousins at his funeral was, he still lives through all of you. And I think that was a nice thing to hear and kind of settled that question a little bit for me in
Hmm.
terms of even if I don't think about him literally looking down, I do recognizing parts of him in myself and in the people around me was really a nice way to think about him still being alive. So yeah, I feel like that was sort of my way of coming to terms with it.
Yeah. Do you have close friends that are Catholic?
I don't think, well, yeah, I do. I have one and then I have others who are different denominations.
And are they kind of, is the one that you're thinking of just kind of a straightforward, yeah, we go to church and my Catholic family's Catholic and that's that? Or are you witness to a kind of a struggle and them trying to figure things out as well?
Yeah, I don't think I wouldn't call it a struggle necessarily, but I do think the one friend I'm thinking of, we met in college and she didn't go to church freshman year, but then starting sophomore year, she did again. So I haven't talked to her explicitly about why she stopped and then started again, but I can
Mhm.
imagine that, when you go to college and you sort of become your own person outside of the family unit, you might question the routines that you get into, but she ultimately went back to practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you didn't have conversations that didn't spark in you, like, I wonder what's going on there, or there's not some unanswered questions at this point in your life where you think, I wonder if I need to answer those somewhere else. It doesn't sound like there are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so, but sometimes I think like I've been thinking a lot recently about needing a creative outlet and like what does that look like for me? Like should I take a painting class or should I, whatever. So I feel like I definitely have the potential for feeling like, okay, there's something in me that's not being answered right now. And how can I answer that thing? So I wouldn't say it's totally off the table that some kind of spiritual practice might be one of those things for me at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you were to get married, would you choose to get married? Let's say you were marrying someone who's Catholic. Would you
Mhm.
marry in the church, or even if you weren't marrying someone Catholic, would you still say, yeah, I want to get married in a church setting, or I want that sacrament in that regard? Or what weight does that have for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I think, well, first of all, I just find church buildings really beautiful. So it's kind of a nice place for a wedding
Aesthetically.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, aesthetically. Um, but yeah, I mean, if I were marrying someone whose faith was really important to them, then I would do whatever um, they wanted. But I do think there's something kind of nice about I don't know if gravitas is the right word, but the sort of this is bigger than us
Mm.
sentiment of a Catholic wedding. But I'm not sure if since I'm not really a practicing Catholic, I don't know if it would resonate with me. So yeah, I don't honestly know the answer to that, but
Mm.
I feel like probably not unless it were important to my spouse.
Yeah. And some people have very specific ideas about their wedding, even
Yeah.
though they're not even dating anyone. You're like, okay, so you're going
Yeah,
to come down the
exactly.
aisle of this church on a unicorn. Like, no, yeah. But
Right.
you're not one of those people.
I'm not one of those people, no.
I want it on a beach. Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing like that. Let's go back to beauty for a second.
Yeah.
How does beauty fit in? Like, why traditionally people have understood God and beauty, truth, those kind of things, all in the same list or in the
Mm.
same area. How do you explain? This is a hard question. How do you explain beauty? Like what's going on? I mean, you're in Europe and you're seeing probably a lot of beautiful
Yeah.
things. You live in
Yeah.
Brooklyn. There's a lot of beautiful things that you're probably used to,
Hmm.
but you're seeing
Yeah.
new ones. So what's that all about for you? If you were to
Yeah.
take a crack at it.
Well, this is a great question. And also for me, because art history is um, one of my majors. So I'm kind of thinking about that all the time. And I have found, I've been to several incredible cathedrals and churches since being here in Europe. And the sense of awe, I think, and something unexplainable and bigger than you, um, that is often very connected to beauty for me. Um, I mean, whether it be in a cathedral or, on top of a cliff looking at the ocean or something where um, you just can't quite wrap your head around it, I think is often tied to beauty for me. So I think it makes sense that God and divinity and beauty are all sort of combined because um, it's all something that we can't totally understand or explain, but it feels right when you see it.
Is there something that you've seen since you've been in France that you could talk about that really hits you in that way?
Yeah, definitely. I think two things I'm thinking of. One, we went to this exotic botanical garden in Aise, France, on the Côte d'Azur. And it was just, the sun was shining and we were on top of this kind of medieval cliffside town with these cacti, and the ocean was, incredibly blue. And it just felt very surreal and peaceful. And then I was in Milan last week and we went to the Duomo, and that was kind of a similar feeling of just like, literal jaw drop moment. Yeah, so those are kind of two examples from recently, but honestly, I keep going to new places and seeing things and thinking, okay, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and then going somewhere else and, it's the same.
Yeah. What do you think about the uselessness of those pieces of art? As far as, I mean, you're an art history major. Like, what's the point of that? I mean, that seems like a lot of outlay of money, like the Duomo in Milan in particular. Yeah. You just think,
yeah,
how do you manage that, the uselessness of beautiful things?
I always think about the conditions in which they were built. So with the, Notre Dame or the Duomo or any of these medieval ancient churches, thinking about the conditions in which people were living at the time in these tiny, cramped houses, and then going into this building that seems like larger than life and more beautiful than anything you could ever imagine. I think that matters a lot to know that things are possible beyond your own day-to-day life, and that humans are capable of creating new worlds for themselves, within these churches and or other beautiful spaces. Yeah, so I think giving people the opportunity to be awed by something is really powerful and important.
That's so good to hear that coming from that direction, because I often, when I see big churches like that, and it's particularly visible to me in Rome, is that it just seems often you're looking at something and it's big and gorgeous and all the rest, and it seems like an exercise of power to, kind of an oppressive sort of sense. I like your articulation of what it does for people coming from, I don't know, below, as opposed to impressing people from above.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is also true.
Yeah.
Like, it's undeniably a power move, but yeah.
Yeah. And do you think when people look at art or beauty, and they walk away, are they inspired like, oh, humans can do that, or the world's more than just my cramped hut? Does it just give them hope, or does it kind of shake them loose to ask bigger questions about how does the universe work and what's my role in it?
Yeah, I think it can. I think, of course it depends on the person, but I often find that even if I walk away from something beautiful and I'm like, okay, well, what's for lunch? I'm moving on. It comes back, later. Yeah. And I think also, I think there is some level of inspiring hope in it too, of, XYZ thing is terrible, but at least I saw this amazing thing. And there's also opportunities to be in the presence of beauty at the same time.
Yeah. That's really good to hear, because I look at a lot of art. I just have for years. I worked at a gallery, and when I first moved to New York, and I just got in the habit of like going to museums and buildings and architecture and different countries and all the rest. And I just see a lot of art, and I'm kind of always asking that question, not as well as you're asking it, I honestly, but about like, how am I just consuming more, one more painting or one more sculpture, or just like, am I just consuming more? What am I looking for? And for me, does it connect me to the largeness of the human spirit, or what's capable? I don't know the answer to that really, but
I think, because I also have asked myself that question, especially with the intention of going into the art history field, thinking to myself, like, is this a useless job? Am I not saving lives? Like, what's the point of this? But I do think that, especially at my age, kind of asking all of these questions of like, what's the point of life and what's the point of everything? And then seeing that people from 500, 1,000 years ago were still asking the same questions, I think is really comforting in a certain way.
Yeah. What to change the subject just a little bit? What do you do with the suffering in the world? Because there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you could let me know what to do, that would be great. Like how do you manage the suffering thing?
Yeah. Honestly, I think a big part of it is compartmentalizing and ignoring, which is terrible, but kind of necessary, I think, to just get through your day. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is something I've been thinking about a lot recently as well, about, seeing injustice and feeling that I have a responsibility to do something about it, but it feels way too big to take on. So I think finding concrete actions a lot of the time is helpful. Um, like volunteering or protesting or whatever is feasible. But that honestly often doesn't feel like a, a big enough reaction, but it feels like the only thing that can be done. So, yeah.
I ask that because some people will kind of take the off ramp with the God question because they think, well, if there's a God, why does God allow suffering? Why isn't God doing something about it?
Yeah.
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 And it doesn't sound like that's the off ramp you took.
I don't think so. I mean, I understand that off ramp, but I think I think I believe that everything happens for a reason, although at the same time saying that sounds very callous in some ways to, the real things that people go through. So I don't mean to say that, people experiencing the worst of humanity, it's for a reason. But yeah, I think it's all connected, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Where do you think people are? Because the way sometimes people answer that question about the suffering and why does God let it, one of the ways to answer it is, well, we're free to change it if you want. And then what you just said, well, sometimes it's so large, who could actually change it? I mean, who am I to actually be able to change it? I could protest or whatever, give some money here, that sort of thing. Because one of the elements of Christianity is the freedom of the human person to act, to make changes. And so, the suffering in the world is almost always the result of human choices, and some bad choices. Yeah. I don't know if that answers. I'm wondering if that answers it for me, or just continues to open up the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do think I agree with that sentiment, though, that we have the power to change things, but sometimes it feels like not every one of us has that power. Like there's going to be one out of every 100 people whose actions, create a revolution, but you don't know who that person's going to be.
Yeah.
Which can be the disheartening part, I think.
Or what that's going to look like. Which snowflake is it? That's the final snowflake needed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. What's your view on prayer as far as affecting change? How would you kind of parse that dynamic?
Yeah. I don't think I believe that praying for something makes it happen. But I do think that keeping something in mind as not a mantra necessarily, but a sort of guiding principle does have the ability to affect change. So I'm not sure where that sort of intersects with prayer, but yeah, just being intentional about keeping a particular thing in mind, I think when paired with action can do something.
Yeah. One of the pieces that's helpful in religious practice is, and it's often articulated through the prayer action, is that the prayer by praying is able to not be responsible for the entire world because they are continuing to petition a larger force outside of themselves. And so it relieves some of the crushing burden to be in charge and responsible for the world and your loved ones and the cancer that your uncle's having, all those sorts of things. Not as a way to escape responsibility, but to appropriately place what you can do in the right bucket and everything you can't do in another one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that has been something that I didn't necessarily make the distinction before of praying for things that you can't control anyway. I think sometimes I think about I think about prayer as sort of something that people use as a cop out sometimes of, like when, for example, a few years ago, we were talking about gun violence a lot and the sort of thoughts and prayers thing that gets brought up. I think that sort of, I lumped prayer in with that sort of inaction, but that does make sense.
Yeah. Where do you get your hope? Like, there's lots of reasons to be completely hopeless. And I wouldn't even say like in today, not just today. I mean, always, there's always been, the news might be more, vivid at the moment, but it's always been a mess.
Yeah. I think actually that's kind of partially where I get my hope from is history. Like it's always been terrible and it's also always been great, so I think that's part of it. And I think the people around me too, having fun with people and laughing with people and overall everyone in my life is wonderful. So that I think it's hard to not be hopeful when it's like there's so many good people and with the history aspect of, we've always gotten through it. I think I try to keep that in mind.
Have you ever gone through periods where you were really hopeless?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And this is the kind of stuff that kind of reemerged for you and you thought, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think just reminding myself that people have always figured it out. And I think it kind of ties back to the beauty thing too, I've been fortunate enough to experience so much beauty, either, aesthetic beauty, but also love and all that. So I think those two things combined pull you out sometimes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And resonant with my own experience too of what in face of reasons for hopelessness, there are these other things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the big pieces about organized religion that is sometimes just the background is that it provides a place for people, it can provide a place for people to belong, identity, like this is, I belong to this. Where would you say, who do you belong to or to what you belong?
Yeah.
Is it Maggie Miller American or what?
Definitely not right now.
American small a. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think being a part of my family, definitely. Being a part of my city, a New Yorker, a Brooklynite. And I think political party, as much as I don't like that becomes sort of an identity. I think it's true for me. I think I've also seen and experienced like being part of arts organizations that can so I do theater at my university, and that I think is a very similar feeling of we're all creating something together and doing something together, and your identity sort of gets very wrapped up in that. But I think I often find myself identifying with a certain way of thinking, whether that be defined by politics or what I'm studying or whatever it may be. I think intellectually, I find my identity there.
Yeah. And sometimes when people travel and go to Europe or wherever for a semester abroad, when you're away, some of these things come into focus, and you think, oh, actually, that's who I am. Have you had any experience of seeing Catholicism on the ground there in France? I mean, historically,
Yeah,
certainly, but
yeah. I mean, I can't speak to, I don't know if it's specifically Catholicism, but definitely Christianity in general. I know several people who have gone to church here and really found community there, and especially like international churches, been able to meet people from all over the world. So that has actually, I think, been a really important way that a lot of people have broken out of their sort of American
hmm.
bubble, since
Hmm.
everyone we go to school with is American or English speaking. And I have been not necessarily jealous of that, but sort of wishing that I had some sort of similar built-in community
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. When you're pulled out of Brooklyn, yeah,
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 yeah.
that's interesting. Excellent. Do you have other questions for me that may have come up or in this topic that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah. Um, I guess I was interested by what you were saying about seeing these sort of big churches or elaborate churches as being symbols of power. How do you sort of reconcile that for yourself of like the sort of historical, political side of Catholicism with your own personal attachment to it?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of an ongoing debate in culture about how artifacts and culture are built, you know,
Hmm.
and then as they go through time, do certain artifacts, are they canceled because of the intent in which they were first created or who funded them, and that argument,
Right, right.
that conversation right now. And I think that I typically see it as, yeah, when I'm standing in Rome and I see a gorgeous church and on the front of it in letters that are 10 feet high, it says Farnese, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's not the most humble thing I've seen in a church lately, you know.
Right, right. Yeah.
And by the same, and the Farnese family, like, oh, they're fun. Would
Yeah.
does that mean that beauty didn't happen anyway? You know, yeah, it did.
Right.
It did. And there were where did the money come from that Jane Austen was writing about? I can't read Jane Austen because, a bunch of the money from Darcy's estate was actually from sugar plantations in Barbados. Like, I don't know.
Right.
No, but I can see it and think. And for me, I think that's God just continuing to work. Continue to
Mm.
work through and create beauty, not in spite of, or just kind of like it's bigger even than they are. It's bigger
Mm.
than the Farnese family, or it's bigger than that beauty comes out of those pieces. Because as we mentioned before, it's kind of always been a mess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good is very clear to me.
Mm.
Like, if we're going to wait around until all the conditions are right to create a piece of art that is completely unencumbered by any maybe dodgy intentions or where the funding exactly came from, well, you're never going to create anything. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So do you believe that it's all planned out or it's
I
sort of
don't,
continuing to happen?
I don't, I don't, I don't spend much time thinking that everything's, this blueprint, and we dive in, and because a lot of it, I just don't. I see the relationship with the divine is a live relationship rather than one that's set and
Mm.
static. That you just kind of you're the rat that walks into the maze and you bump this way and an opening bumps up this way and then this. That you don't really have a choice and is all going to you're gonna die that way in that situation anyway. I just don't see it
Hmm.
as all that kind of predestination. So it's a live conversation that calls for a lot of active discernment and paying attention to what's going on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. My other sort of unrelated question is I've always been kind of interested in the idea of sins and
Hmm.
what is considered to be a sin by, the Catholic Church, for example. Some of them make sense to me. Some of them I think that doesn't really feel relevant. Um, so I don't know. What's your sort of, do you think that all of them are the same?
Well, now I feel like I've asked you to ask this question, even though I have not, because I'm kind of in the middle of finishing a whole series on my newsletter on Substack about the seven deadly sins, right?
Oh, okay, great.
trying to like open those up for myself, but also for in general, trying to
Hmm.
understand how they work and how sin patterns work. So you can look there, but but also the sin structure or the understanding what actions qualify as sin or not is
Hmm.
really just meant to be useful for a person. It's meant to be
Hmm.
structure or scaffolding to help build a life that is truly thriving, you know? So like it's worth it for the tradition, people working within the tradition, to articulate and to identify sin patterns and to begin to understand, okay, so why is a person, why is a person committing the sin of, let's say, lust?
Hmm.
If you were to break that down? But all of them kind of break down in a similar way, which is we get afraid and we reach for the wrong things to try to to fill or to stop the fear. And the sin structure within certainly Catholicism, but within Christianity, is trying to say, oh wait, here's some scaffolding. The Ten Commandments are, they were really enthusiastically received by the Israelites because finally there was kind of a map of like, oh, okay, so if I continue to honor God once a week, keep holy the Sabbath, right? Then my life actually is more centered and
Hmm.
solid and not prone to just kind of falling apart. It's if there is a sin structure around killing people, I think we're all going to be better. And that
Right.
so
Yeah.
how does that work? Now, some of the sins, like what's a sin for you that seems to be like not that usefully defined?
Um, like gluttony, I guess.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, I just wrote on that, and gluttony is really interesting to look at about like why is a person not able to understand what's enough?
Mm.
What is it that's driving someone to uh, shove too much in, and the antidote is it like if that sin is identified or in your practice or someone else does, that you might say, oh wait, how do I slow down to appreciate what's going on? How does this
Mm.
sin actually manifest my disregard for creation and by extension the creator? How is it that I
Mm.
just want to shove in more rather than enjoy more? How do
Right.
I, by defining that, kind of alerts people that this is a tendency that
Right.
that you really can't get out of balance. You can get way out of
Right.
balance, and you can choose to get out of balance.
So you sort of think about it on the more philosophical or metaphorical level in some ways. I mean, there's a literal aspect of like you're consuming too
Yeah,
much, but also the implications of that.
yeah, because sin structures, and to understand them, have as their goal human flourishing. So to back up from that,
Right.
you're like that action or repeated activity is not leading to human flourishing. It just isn't.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you back away from that? And also sinning is really helpful to understand. Like a good way of understanding that it's often when people say I'm really angry, what's helpful is for them to be able to say I feel anger, and therefore
Hmm.
they're not wholly identified with this thing that's actually making them really unhappy, because
Yeah.
there's this space that opens between I feel anger and then I can do something about
Hmm.
it, as opposed to I
Hmm.
am what I am feeling, which is not true because there's always kind of that impartial observer within you.
Hmm.
That if you do enough interior work, you're like, oh, why am I feeling that? But I'm also noticing that I'm feeling that. Then who's doing the feeling? It's like, so
Right.
you have some
Yeah.
space to make other choices. And
Yeah.
sin is only sin when you have a choice to do otherwise.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Hmm.
so a woman is raped. Did she commit adultery? No, she had no choice. There wasn't a choice there, right?
Right.
So that was
Right.
removed. Like, so, all those things kind of begin to,
Yeah.
yeah. And hearing confessions is really good and really interesting in that regard.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Because I think that sort of is an area where I often bump up against organized religion in terms of, I think, spin is very quickly turned on people of like you're committing a sin and therefore you're a bad person. So yeah, I think that's a useful definition instead of how I was thinking about it, which is often kind of used as a weapon against others.
Yeah. And completely understood, because if sin is seen as certainly imbalance within or a disfiguring of often a good impulse, I mean, fornication or sexual sin is almost always can be seen of that, of like, the ability and the desire to be sexually intimate. That's a good in itself. But how does it get out of balance or begin to wreck things? It can do that. Then so the church as an organization as well, of like being organized, that is a value. Being overly organized is not. And creating very strong in and out sort of you're in, that other person's out sort of dynamics or categories isn't very helpful at all. But it's just also more evidence of, the frailty of human nature, and that frailty is writ large in groups of human beings. She's like, oh, of course it's a mess.
Yeah.
What'd you expect? Humans are in charge.
It's people.
It's people.
Yeah.
I can't believe the church did that. Oh, I can. Have you met who's in the church? Like regular people? Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. This was awesome.
It's just so good to see you. And so I'm glad that you're having a good time in France.
Yes.
And you're always completely worth talking to.
Oh, well, thank you. Likewise.
Thank you so much for listening to Catholics in Ordinary Time. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing so you don't miss anything in the rest of the season. Also, please recommend this to friends and family. And if you're feeling up to it, please leave us a review. That makes all the difference. Again, thanks so much for listening.